I have here with me on the stage, it's Matt Rossa. He's the Innovation Director of British American Tobacco, which I really appreciate because he sent us a very, very funny introduction, and I will try to quote it from memory. He said that he started his innovation career, if I remember correctly, in BAT Japan,
Yes.
when you launched some very innovative products which the customers loved, but they lost a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Appreciate the honesty. Okay, but afterwards, right now, Matt, I think it's one of the best people I would recommend you to catch up during the network break, because he's in charge of the Global Innovation Center in British American Tobacco, which more or less means that he set up a team that generated innovation for the next 5 years for the company. Yeah. He did it once in London, and right now you're doing it in Jakarta.
That's correct.
Okay. I never mentioned to you, but I worked for 1.5 years in Jakarta.
Really?
So I do know what Kratek means, and I do know how much people there smoke. So it's still one of the strongest markets for tobacco worldwide, I think. Correct. 120 million, 220 million, right?
Yes.
Okay. Matt, I hope you're fine with the introduction. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Okay. The ground rules. If you have a question that's particular to your job, write it down, email me afterwards, catch me on a smoking break, meet me at the bar or casino later tonight, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. If it's something that you think the group would benefit from, by all means, shout it out. I have no problem being interrupted throughout my presentation. The other thing is, I've been you. I know how boring it is to sit and listen to a presentation that isn't applicable to you. So I have a very different style. I'm the opposite of Bill Gates. So he is the master of 3 slides with 3 points per slide. And God bless him, he's rolling over in his grave because I'm going to go through 70 slides in about 35 minutes, packed full of information. That way, at least everyone in here, whether you're the entry-level innovation manager or a CEO, hopefully you'll find something that's relevant to you. It might be like finding a needle in the haystack, but hopefully there'll be something for everyone. And by all means, if you think the group would benefit, feel free to stop me, ask for clarification, or a question at any time. Legal notice, I work for a tobacco company, so any reference to a consumer means that I am referencing an adult smoker over the age of 21 years old. So I work for British American Tobacco. We're the world's most international tobacco group. That's a nice way of saying we're not the biggest. But we are in the greatest number of countries. And if you're stupid enough to smoke, as I am, then hopefully you're smart enough to at least smoke one of our great brands. So we have the best portfolio of brands in the market in what historically has been the least innovative industry. You'd be hard-pressed to find less innovation than in the tobacco industry for about 99 years. I think this slide pretty much sums it up. There was one innovation, and it was putting a filter on a cigarette. So that sums up innovation in tobacco for 99 years. However, in the last few years, there's been a lot of innovation in our industry, and that's driven mainly by industry consolidation, fewer people smoking. Therefore, you have to have something that's more relevant to the consumer in order to break through. Huge amount of industry consolidation, a large amount of investment into things that are new. Just from my own experience in Japan, I was sent out to Japan to start up an innovation center. I didn't know a damn thing about cigarettes and even less about innovation. That being said, we set up a team, we set up a process, and as Meldrum said before, the process isn't what makes it, you can't be a slave to the process. And the process is simply a guide. What I'm going to show you today is the many iterations using a process to make the process work. And there was 30 questions sent out that some of you asked. Is the process important? Is the creative important? You absolutely, fundamentally have to have a process. If for no other reason than to explain what the heck your job is and what you're doing. A process is essential in order to get everyone to understand your function. It also gives you a barometer, but you can't be a slave to it, and nothing good is going to come of the process itself. It's what you make of it. In terms of what we did, we managed to launch 6 new-to-world innovations in a period of 3 years. So I'm in a boring industry. It might have nothing to do with yours, but the process that we went through and the way that we talked with consumers, I think, is applicable to any industry. So how do you involve consumers? Well, Procter & Gamble is the most early example where they put up on a website and said, let's hear your ideas. And everyone said, that's great, that's open innovation, right? But again, that's just an idea. And as you heard earlier, an idea is essentially worthless unless you can commercialize that idea. You can do scientific consumer needs studies. You can look internally and say, we need cost efficiency, we need a program for our wholesalers, we need something new for our brand. Or if you're Apple, you don't do any of that, right? You don't have an internal process, you don't do focus groups. There's one stage gate, and it was Bill Gates saying the curve is right or the curve isn't right. It's perfect to go to a consumer or it's not. So there's many ways of doing innovation. There's many ways of involving a consumer. I don't think most of us work in a company like Apple. So I'm going to give you an example that hopefully you can use in any industry. So, first of all, how many of you have talked to your consumers in the last year? Show of hands. Okay, keep them up. How many in the last month? Oh, pretty good. That's fairly good. What I'm going to show today is that is a systematic way of ensuring that you keep talking to your consumers. Most manufacturers don't do it, and when they do it, they don't do it in a systematic way that is able to link up the multiple needs of a company. But if you can, it's the best way to accomplish a business and marketing goal. One small example, we've got Nestle, which has a number of brands. They have 29% global market share, 17% share in the US, and there's Coca-Cola, which had 0% share in Japan, and the failure rate of new beverage launches in Japan is 85%. So that being said, both companies essentially had a mandate to deliver lower cost and a consumer proposition that fits into the eco territory. So Nestle delivered a innovation that reduced material 40%. They changed the shape of the bottle to identify to consumers that this fits your new lifestyle, and it was a recognizable difference to the other products in the market, and they got a 7.8% sales increase. By any stretch of the imagination, that's a successful product launch. Coke did it somewhat differently. They had more consumer involvement. They started with online surveys, personal interviews, diary exercise. They then put it into focus groups. They then went home with consumers. They watched what they did. They watched how they used bottles. They watched what their needs were for the category. And the benefits were that they ended up portraying where not only is it a bottle, not only is it healthy for you, but when it's done, it has a new closing ritual, right? You crunch it. It sounds different. It looks different once you crunch it, and that fits your on-the-go lifestyle. So while both propositions for the company delivered to the corporate need of lower materials, the Coke proposition delivered to a need of a consumer ritual, right? So they didn't advertise eco. They advertised, this is the bottle that makes your life better. This is the bottle that makes you feel better because instead of throwing it in a normal trash bin, you can compact it, throw it away in the right bin. It takes up less space in your trash compactor at home. They ended up with 40% share and sold 1 billion bottles inside of 2 years. So this is the second largest market in the world, and they were able to achieve that kind of market share and a price premium to every offer in the market. And if flattery is, I'm blanking, there's a term. If flattery is, anyone? The most sincere form of, anyway. Thank you, the most sincere form of, anyway. Eventually, Nestle adopted the Coke positioning with the crushing of the bottle. So the most sincere form of flattery is imitation or something like that. They basically adopted Coke's platform. So they had the exact same technology. One was delivered better. Why? Because they talked to consumers. They found out the real consumer need and the real consumer benefit and the real consumer reason to believe of why that product was worth purchasing. So to satisfy a corporate mandate and a marketing mandate, you can link up those needs and mobilize an entire organization to launch. But what makes a difference between a successful launch and an unsuccessful launch is talking to your consumers and finding out what's really relevant to them. Here's another, one of my least favorite examples from personal experience. Here's a category that I'm guessing never did any consumer research, and especially no ethnographic studies, right? So in Japan, 4 out of every 5 hair soap product is now bought in a refill. And it took 11 years, but 80% of the market is refill. And yet, every pack, it was the same for 11 years. You tear it off, and you pour it in. And I don't know if you're like me, but I'm guessing the majority of people, anytime you have to refill something, the first thing you do is you walk over to a sink and do it, because it makes a mess. And it took the 14th, 15th, 16th, 18th company to buy the same damn machine. Right? So what was the first mover advantage to a company that actually did some ethnography, went home with the consumer, saw that they poured over the sink? Instead of sinking the money into machines and having to wait for the second generation of machine once the first ones wore out, if the 12th company would have just spent some time with the consumer and launched a directional refill 5 years earlier, they probably could have cornered the market. So again, it's a simple example of an industry that simply didn't talk to the consumers to find out what their needs really were. So therefore, looking at these examples, I've instituted, in my company at least, what I like to think of as a systematic way to make sure that in every step, we're in line with what the consumer wants. So how did we start? We started by getting everyone aligned to the same vision, so everyone on the innovation bus, and I'll talk more about this in the workshop later today. And we implemented a stage gate, and we involved cross-functional teams internally. And all that's great, but no innovation will ever be successful if it's always managed within. No innovation can happen, as you heard earlier today, by putting 10 people from within the company in a room with a whiteboard, right? You might come up with an idea, and you might then be able to figure out a way to commercialize it, and you might be able to launch it. But that's going to be a substandard proposition, product, marketing. Everything about that mix is going to be inferior unless you involve the consumer. And that's why that's what my main focus today is. And there's many ways to talk with consumers, right? So many of you have probably attended or been a part of or have commissioned focus groups, interviews. There's online surveys, there's SMS, there's one-to-one. There's advanced multiple methods in terms of targeting consumers. And the place that, in terms of the stage gate, the real involvement for me is in the first 3 gates, right? Because that's when you can really make a difference in the product and the marketing proposition that you're eventually going to launch. So in terms of the process and where you start, if that first gate is ideation, do you start with 10 guys in a room? Sure. But that better be only one of the 5, 6, 10 ways that you're collecting ideas. So you look at your consumer needs, your brand needs, your trade needs, you look outside of the company, you can have idea capture. One of the things that we do is we talk to trend scouts, so completely independent of our industry, what's going on in other industries? What are consumers doing? What materials are being used? What are the new packaging trends in other categories? We have internal idea capture, so we built a system that allowed for our 4 divisions. Each branch is a different sales team, each leaf is a person, so when you go over it, you can see how many ideas you've submitted. Every month, we launch a stimulus, and we say, look out for this trend, look out for this material. They can simply add input an idea. We have a KPI where every month each sales team spends at least 1 hour thinking of ideas or giving examples from what they've seen in the market. So there are ways to institutionalize it within your organization to get ideas. Always recognize then and have a way to reward the winner, because nothing breeds success like a good example. It's a very low-cost way of involving your entire organization in innovation. And there are off-the-shelf solutions that do this from a number of suppliers. I was unfortunate enough to do this in 2007, so we had to build the system ourselves. But you can find vendors now that can do this for you in a fairly off-the-shelf solution. Once you have that idea, regardless of where it comes from, that's my first consumer screen. I then put it in what I call a consumer lab. And a consumer lab is not a focus group. A focus group is a collection of 8 to 10 individuals who have nothing better to do on a Monday night than to earn $100. So from my point of view, they're not exactly visionary, they're not exactly insightful, they're not going to help you frame your proposition. But the right consumers are, right? So who is the right consumer? Well, it's someone who naturally is in tune with consumers, someone who naturally gets consumer insights and trends, someone who naturally knows what's going on. So the characteristics to recruit a good, insightful consumer, a thought leader, an opinion leader, would be a successful 27 to 35-year-old. Why 27? Because they have to know the difference between a trend and a fad. They have to have some education level in terms of consumer insights based on their experience. Ideally, they'd be experts in their field. They need to be local. So finding someone from Malaysia who happens to live in Romania isn't going to be as useful as someone from Bucharest. So you want someone in the locality that you are particularly testing. And initially you want to separate male and female until you can prove that the insights you're getting are similar. So sometimes you want to keep them separate, sometimes you can combine them. In terms of my group, an ideal group through experience that I've found is an architect, a graphic designer, an industrial designer, a magazine editor, a fashion designer, an entrepreneur in the entertainment industry, so a bar owner, a DJ, and then 2 consumers selected due to both their ability to know consumers in a particular articulate nature. And you'll see in my first point here, the ideal group size of 8, it's important for me to use people outside of category. So in other words, if you're a telecom company and you're researching mobile phones, it's probably not the best thing to talk to only 22-year-olds, right? So you probably want people younger and older than your typical age group. Similarly with me, the future of smoking is less smoking, right? More people are going to quit and not smoke than smoke. So in terms of what are the current needs and the future needs and benefits, hearing from non-smokers is as valuable as hearing from smokers. Same thing can be applied, because again, this isn't about a target audience. This is about finding the right people to shape the future of what you want to offer to consumers. So once you have talked to consumers, you've screened them internally, you've got feedback from your organization, your brand team, your trade team, you then have to decide, is this an idea worth pursuing? And we put an internal panel, we screen those ideas and due to feasibility and whether or not it makes sense. Some go through and some don't, and they go back into the cycle. So they might go back to a collab until it's ready. They might go back until it hits the right resonance within the organization that it's a viable thing to spend money on. But the ones that do make it through, then we talk to consumers again, but in a completely different way. So we did it in a very qualified setting in terms of this collab. Now I want to quantify it, because I want to prove to the business that this is something worth doing. So how do you quantify it? The simplest way is put it online. You can talk to 300, 1,000, 10,000 consumers inside of 2 days. You can find out the purchase intent, you can find out the price they're willing to pay, the price they're not willing to pay, but most importantly, it's not about screening an idea. It's about screening, in this case, 24 ideas. And by doing so, you learn the relative strength of one idea over another. And this is how we found the best way to judge the value of a portfolio. And it's not absolute. It's not the one that scored the highest on the left-hand side is going to be the one that we launch. It's about relative strength. So the ones that are the weakest, we don't concentrate on, or we put back into rework then. But it's about figuring out the relative strength and figuring out the portfolio of 6 or 8 that are worth then looking at to then make a project out of. And with today's options, there are dozens of ways to do this, right? You could do it online, as I mentioned. You could do it offline by mall intercepts. You can do it with ethnographic interviews, diary exercises, geographic splits, age splits, male-female splits, central location tests, neuroscience, right? You can hook up electrodes to people's brains and figure out if they like the color blue or red. There are so many ways to get consumer insights in a quantifiable manner in order to screen and judge the worthiness of an idea. And again, it's the relative strength of an idea, because as of yet, I haven't spent $1 on an innovations project. So I'm still in ideas. So at the idea stage, before I've spent $1, this is the number of touch points I've already had. I've already had 3 different consumer interactions. I've already had 2 different employee engagements. They've been able to submit ideas, and they've been able to screen the ideas. And in terms of outside partners, I've been able to get their input in terms of the trend scouts, and I hire an agency, obviously, to run the consumer lab so that not only do I hear what they're saying, but hopefully someone smarter than me is sitting there synthesizing and giving me their feedback and giving me more insights. And I think there are a few people here today that provide that kind of service. And again, all of this is before it's even a project. This is how involved I want a consumer to be in terms of screening the ideas. So my recommendation is have qualitative means of screening it, and then once you are done with your qualitative, move into quant, because there's nothing that will reinforce your business idea as much as a quant result. If you're going to go now ask for resources, if you're going to go ask for a multidiscipline project team to take something to market, you need something stronger than 8 consumers that think it's a good idea. Or as you heard Meldrum say earlier today, you know, I think it's wood. I think it's wood cleaning, right? And the organization has to go around that idea. Or you have to have the strength to kick it out. Well, one way to get the organization behind your idea is to quantify it. And this is a really easy, cheap, inexpensive, and smart way to ensure that you're working on the right things and sell it to the organization. Once you pick an idea, I recommend splitting it into 2 work streams, the proposition and marketing and the product. From the product side, we utilize joint development agreements with 8 global partners, depending on their field of expertise. And the way we've been able to get good partners is we don't haggle over the IP. It's very simple. When it comes to our industry, we get the IP, and if it's something that can be applicable in another industry, they get the IP in another field. And in today's world, it's much easier than 6 years ago. 6 years ago, to find a partner, you had to almost hire an agency to find and source the right person globally. Today, you can do it inside of 10 minutes. You can go on LinkedIn, you can go to different expert forums and find the right global partners to work on things. And in terms of product, we have 1,400 scientists internally, and yet I still go external. Because internally, you're always going to have the sense of their history, of the organizational baggage, and the process. You need those 1,400 people behind you, but you also need someone from the outside questioning, prodding, scoping, broadening the horizon of what those 1,400 people can and should be looking at. So in my experience, the way to get speed is to go with an external partner, regardless of your product. A simple example is we had 2 technical issues. So we contracted an external partner called Gen3. It's a consulting firm in Cambridge with a loose affiliation of about 100 scientists at the Polytechnic Institute in St. Petersburg, Russia. And our contract was basically set up for speed. We said we have 2 problems. We've been working on them for a year, can't crack them. We think you can. How long do you think it'll take? They came back, said 9 months. We said, great, here's a contract for 6 months with a bonus if you can do it in 6 months. Because I don't want to wait 9 months. So you crack it in 6 months, and I'll give you a bonus. They did it, they cracked it. We then had our internal scientists validate it, and that's how you get speed. If we had just sat there internally, we would have been going through the motions year after year, cycle after cycle, without any real impetus for change. By going externally, you get the stimulus that you need to make a change. I won't go through their methodology, but basically, one of the reasons of going externally is, again, to get access to their methodology, to get access to a different way of thinking. We had some of your questions were submitted, and it was, how do you get people to do things differently in your organization? Well, by bringing in outside people, by challenging the norms, by challenging the way you've always done things. That's the way that you embed organizational change and innovation into your organization. It's also the way that you get speed on a particular project. So we've got a marketing work stream and a product work stream, and both of them have multiple consumer touch points. So in terms of the idea, as I showed, we do a qual session, then a quant screen. Then at the concept level, we run more consumer labs. Then we brand it. Then we run particular focus groups with the target consumer that you're after to make sure that the thing that you're making, the thing that your future thinkers think is relevant, really is relevant for your target audience. If it passes that screen, then we hand it over to the brand team and we say, we think this is ready to go. This is a valid consumer proposition. Similarly, from the product side, we run the consumer labs and ritual study. So here's the product. How is it made? how could it be made differently? What can be trimmed out of it? What can be added to it? We make prototypes, we give the prototypes to consumers, and we spend the time watching them use it. So we run multiple consumer labs with consumers using, smoking, touching, feeling our prototypes. It's essential to find out the strengths and weaknesses of what you're working on. In terms of using the outside partners, sometimes they work great internally and sometimes they don't. And we have absolutely great examples of both. We have wonderful examples of partners working with us, lockstep each step of the way, and we have examples where they butt heads from day one. And the best way to do that is to simply pit the two teams against each other. Have an external group working on the same solution that your internal group is working on. It's another way to get speed in your product. There's way worse things in the world than having two prototypes to take to consumers and have them tell you the strengths and weaknesses of each. So going externally allows you to get that speed and that external perspective. So in these middle stages, the way that to involve consumers, again, qualitative in terms of using the product, ethnographic study, go with them, watch them, see what they do with it, see how they store it, see how they clean it, see what the strengths and weaknesses are, see what new ritual develops, see how that ritual is different from their old ritual of using a product in the similar category. And then the quantitative study, again, looking at purchase intent, price, and relative strength of one idea, one prototype over another. So we now have a product, we have a proposition, and the number of touch points that we have doubled. So again, one way of launching a product is as you heard the Swifter example from this morning, I want it to clean wood better, right? That could be done completely internally. Another way is to go through the pain and effort of this process, which I think is the most beneficial, which is, again, working now at the later stages, you're putting it through that collab again. You're doing a central location test, seeing consumers use it, putting it through again, then do a branded focus group. In terms of your employee and internal interactions, you have the technical feasibility, you have the validation of the work that outside experts have done. You have a legal and IP check to make sure that what you're doing is applicable for the market as well as retaining any intellectual property rights. And you have a scientific community that has validated it. In terms of your outside partners now, you've got your external scientific or technology firm to test and to help learn from. Any questions? Am I going okay? You guys bored? Okay. So in terms of the late stages, again, that's when I think you bring in a focus group. I don't ever want to talk to a quote-unquote target consumer about an innovation, because there's no better way to kill an idea than to tell a consumer that what they're currently using stinks, is outdated, and what do they think about change. My experience is it's the simplest way to get something to gravitate toward the mean and not come up with something that's relevant for the future. And if your timeline is similar to my company's timeline, an innovation could take anywhere from 6 months, which is rare, but most likely 3 years. So you're not designing something for a consumer to use 6 months from now. A lot of you will be working on projects for something that a consumer will use 3 years from now. And it's hard for a focus group to visualize what their life will be like in 3 years. So I only do focus groups at the very end, once you have a full proposition and product, so that it's absolutely crystal clear to that person what the unique selling proposition and benefit and reason to believe in the proposition is. So, the iterative process from a marketing proposition is this. I start with a quantitative consumer needs study. We then generate ideas. We put those ideas in consumer labs. The ideas that come out of consumer labs that are good, we quantify. The ones that win in the the ones that are worth pursuing out of quantification go back into consumer labs. When it's all done, we brand it, put it in focus groups, and then we do a final quant. If it passes each of those stages, it goes to launch. The iteration comes because it's rare that something passes each of those stages. So at each one of these steps, when something fails, it doesn't get kicked to the curb. It gets reworked, and it goes back in. And that's the iterative cycle. And the iterative cycle is not internal. It doesn't go back to your creative agency to rework the words on a slide. it goes back to consumers because something is fundamentally not clicking in the quant. So you go back to your consumers and you find a better, stronger reason to believe in your proposition or product. Globally, how does this shake out? Well, for me, the unmet needs study was done in 12 countries. Idea generation is done in our 4 regions. Consumer labs are done in 4 countries. Quantification of ideas is done in every launch market. So if we think this idea is applicable in 10 markets, each of those 10 markets you have to do your quant. Again, then it goes into consumer labs again in multiple countries, focus groups in each launch market, and then a full proposition quant in each launch market. In terms of a single country, such as my current case in Indonesia, a quant study for the country, internal idea generation. I have 5 consumer panels set up in the 5 largest cities, and I go to them monthly. So every month I go to them, and each month they might be working on something they've seen before, something they've seen 20 times, 3 times, and the first time. So you want to have a constant cycle of ideas to bring to them that's new. The other reason to bring up and work with the same panel of consumers is you don't have to start over. So they're with you. They get a sense of ownership from the first iteration of the product to the last. You don't have to start over as you do with a focus group. These consumers are with you, and they're vested in the success of your launch. In terms of the product, very similar, right? So unmet needs, what are the needs of the product? What is your product? How do consumers currently use it? What's the ritual? What's the absolute ritual that they do from the time that how they think about buying it in the store to where and how they dispose of it? Every ritual in that life cycle of the product, you should be mapping. You should find out what benefit you can add to that product cycle and what you can take out. You then engage an outside partner, and again, it's to get speed, it's to learn a different methodology, a different approach, and then keep going in consumer labs until you have a product that you think is ready to roll out to the market. So my final thoughts on this consumer insights are involve the right consumers at each stage gate. You need to quantify each of your qualified findings. The entire thing can be outsourced, but I'd recommend you get personally involved in as much as your schedule will allow. And essentially what I'm saying is the process is important. You absolutely have to have a stage gate process. But that's almost immaterial to me because I use consumers as my actual stage gate. It doesn't progress to the next cycle internally until I have a group of consumers saying, it's ready, I can't make it any better. That's when I know that I've passed a stage gate. And that's when I think it would be, that's what I believe is the best way to have the most consumer relevant marketing and product proposition. So 2 examples of this working and not working. If we want to talk about true iteration, so we had an idea, we did our needs study in 2008. We came up with what we thought was an absolutely bizarre idea. And we put it into collabs beginning in March of 2009. And consumers loved it. They told us benefits that we hadn't thought of. They absolutely loved it. And we ran through this cycle. And we go through the qual, consumers like it, we go to quant, it fails. We put it back, we put it back, we go through, it fails. We put it back, it goes through to 6 markets. For quant, it fails 3 of the 6 markets. Last month I ran my 29th consumer lab on this product and proposition. Okay, that's a lot of consumer groups talking about the same damn thing, all right? But we haven't cracked it yet. And sometimes that's the iterative process that I'm talking about. Sometimes it can take that long. I'd rather have something that takes 36 collabs in 5 years and makes $500 million than something that's half-baked, gets launched into market for 6 months, and is withdrawn 4 months later. The other side is having this process, sometimes you get a winner. So we did the needs study. We did a quick diary and ritual exercise. And basically the diary exercise is, okay, so you have a pack of cigarettes today, you know, where did you buy it? What time did you open it? Where did you throw the cellophane away? What does your cigarette pack mean to me? Well, you know, it's my friend, it's fiddle factor, it occupies my hand when I'm bored, when I'm talking on my cell phone, it's not in my hand, so sometimes it's my visual aid, it's a conversation starter if it's unique. And when don't you like your cigarette pack? Well, it doesn't open properly. If you've ever been to Indonesia or China or Vietnam or Taiwan, you know that about 90% of the population is on bikes. It's pretty hard to open a cigarette pack with 2 hands when you are driving your motorcycle down the road. So I'd like something that can be opened with 1 hand so I can flick a cigarette in and not kill myself. So we came up with a single flick pack so that while 1 hand on your motorcycle, you can retrieve a cigarette with a single stick. So we had a 1-hand open pack. In that same consumer screen, we had an idea for a thread cigarette, so a cigarette that carries different flavors. So we had 2 different concepts, both went into consumer screening in April. The bike concept and the thread concept, they both passed the screen in April. They went into collabs in May, and in the collabs in May, the consumer said, why don't you put those 2 together? If you put those 2 together, it hits this current ritual that we have where a single stick is special and it's different and it's kept for you, and when you offer sticks to other people, their fingers might be dirty, so we turn it upside down, and it's your special stick. So why don't you just sort of solidify the special stick? And that's what we did. So if we didn't talk to consumers, we would have not had that idea to combine them. We wouldn't have known the local relevance of a single stick, and people in Indonesia calling it a lucky stick in their pack. But the collabs taught us that. They took something that we had internally, 2 technologies, and they made it exponentially stronger. So much so that when we go into the focus groups and we showed it, we say, the consumer instantly gets it. Sometimes I buy a cigarette and make a wish of 1 stick. The stick will be flipped upside down, so only I can take it out. It's the luck of the cigarette. I think that's what this concept is trying to say. And that's a competitor, and that's the kind of feedback you want from a focus group. That's when you know your collab has done the job. They've made a proposition that the average consumer can digest simply. And the great thing is, this is a perfect example of no iteration. It went through the first screen, it went through the second screen, tested in focus group, and within 6 months got launched. So to conclude, a consumer-centric approach can and should be layered onto any innovation effort. It doesn't matter your field. You can dedicate time each month in terms of hands-on focus groups, consumer labs, SMS studies, online studies. Similarly, you can do a once-a-year general survey of the landscape in the industry, and you marry those 2 insights to give you the right landscape. Know what your consumers' unmet needs are. It's the most important thing. It's what guides your ideation. If you put 8 people in a room, it doesn't matter how smart they are, how involved they are. If you put 8 people in a room and say, come up with an idea, well, you're going to get the most basic of things, and you're going to get things very tied and very close to what you're doing today. Whereas if you start with the landscape of, these are the challenges, these are what my consumers want, it gives you the playing field, and it gives you the roadmap for your ideation. Unmet needs should be gathered in a scientific, defendable, quantified study. Because as you saw from Meldrum and my quick little stage gate approach, that 4th gate is a business case. That's when you decide how much money to invest. And no one's going to invest in an idea. No one's going to invest in something because a focus group of 10 people said, I like it, or I don't like it. You need the numbers. Nothing sells a concept, an idea, an innovation project like numbers. And today, it is easier and cheaper and quicker to get quantified results than it has ever been in our lifetime. So by all means, get it. And combine briefs. Each of your companies right now have multiple functions delivering to multiple different briefs. There's a power in terms of internal impetus and internal collection of resources and resource allocation if you can combine those briefs, as you saw from the Coke example. The marketing team wanted to leverage an eco proposition. The manufacturing team was tasked with reducing costs 30%. The logistics and supply chain were tasked with reducing their shipping costs 20%. They came up with a solution that satisfied all of those goals. That project is going to have so many more internal resources, money, and priority than a marketing project or a supply chain project. So link up the goals of your organization and find a consumer relevant way to pitch it back to the business. That's the best way to get your company behind an innovation idea. And by doing so, hopefully you end up with some true consumer-relevant innovation, if you're lucky. And if you're really lucky, you get one or two that actually make money. Any questions?
I have one. I think the process that you described is really great and insightful. My question is like, how would you keep it undercover from the competition? Because you said like in certain stages you would involve online surveys. How would you control the fact that the idea that you're working on won't, leak into the market?
It's a good question. It's also a difference to the Procter & Gamble model, where their open innovation truly is an open network. We deal with everything in closed networks. It's still not foolproof, and that's also the reason that we don't only do 1 or 2 ideas in a screen. So by screening 8 ideas at a time, you're not only judging the relative worth of one concept over another and the commercial viability from a consumer perspective of one proposition over another, but you're also masking what your real intent is. So sometimes we'll put an old idea in, sometimes we'll put a new idea in, sometimes we'll put something in there that makes absolutely no sense at all. So that way, if we end up with someone from a competitor or a competitive agency in the field that's screening, it's not exactly a true intent. You can probably get better intelligence by looking at intellectual property and trademark and copyright and patent filings than you can looking at my innovation screens. Because half of my innovation screens are brilliant ideas, and half of the ideas in there are crap. But we do use closed networks, not open networks. Again, with the collabs, it's another reason to keep the same group of people together. You have them signed a confidentiality agreement, you know who they work for, you know if they change jobs, you know their social network. By having a more closed network, you still are able to leverage outside experience and outside insights, but keep, hopefully, what you're working on relatively private.
Any other questions?
In the back?
Yes, talking about duration, what would you do if you didn't have 5 years to hit the jackpot?
If we don't have ideas to hit the jackpot?
No, if you don't have 5 years. So
if you don't have 5
yeah.
years. 5 years in my company is usually due to the length of time to order machines. So the particular example I gave earlier was I was able to execute that in 6 months because Indonesia is unique and we have hand packing. We can hire 14,000 women, put them in a warehouse, and they can pack cigarettes by hand, literally. So I was able to do that in 6 months. Other projects might take 3 years because we literally have to design a machine to make a new product, which I'm sure your industries are similar. So in terms of if you have a short period, a long period of time, if it's not business driven, like waiting on CapEx for a machine, and you simply don't have a machine construct and you have 6 months to do something, you still go to consumers because they're still going to be able to crack it in a more relevant way than you, the person who works with you, your coworker, and your 6 agency resources sitting in a room. So regardless of the amount of time you have, I think the process still works. But again, I would say the shorter amount of time you have, the more outside partners you should talk with. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yep.
Matt, I'd like to ask you a question regarding what is the threshold between driving a market and actually picking up on some consumer trends. Because from what I've seen right now, you are very consumer-centric, which is good. But at some point and in some industries, you just might want to drive the category into some direction where consumers have no idea that things are going on. And to be specific, you're doing like zillions of quants and quals and so on. How do you know if in Singapore you get one single guy which on the paper is saying something, which is great, but the other 10,000 people don't consider it great. So how do you set up which is a micro trend and how do you set up which is something that might kick in the next 5 years?
So that's what the quant is for. So that insight that I get from qual, right, the insight that I think makes sense, I then validate by talking to real consumers and target consumers. So the quant, following the qual, is to make sure that it truly is a relevant insight and it truly is a trend and a relevant trend and maybe not a fad. The first part of your question, I'm sorry. What was it?
Well, it was more like a two-sided question. Basically, you answered to me. I was more concerned about what do you do if you have to drive a category instead of listening to consumers? So basically, you have to create.
It's a good point, and it shows the difference in category between me and Microsoft, right? So you saw the categories earlier, where they truly have to think of the consumer life, and they're, you know, the 16-year-old growing up today is very different than when I was 16. The person in college today and their access to information and the way that they go to class, the way that they access material and the way that they submit material is completely different than any of us in this room. So certain industries have to be leaders. Certain industries, by definition, if you want to win, you have to see the future. In my industry, it's not as important to see the future. That being said, I think there are some safe bets, right? So you can look at long-term trends. Fewer people are smoking. Those that smoke, smoke less per day. So I can say, okay, people have gone traditionally from smoking 20 cigarettes a day to 6 in France. Are they willing to pay the exact same price? And if so, how much more can I get out of them? Once it goes from 6 to 3, is it now a cigar moment? Can I now get $5 a cigarette out of them? And if so, what's the expectation for a $5 cigarette? So while I'm not trying to be a visionary to take my industry somewhere, I still can leverage the insights based on historical trends and make some guesses of where the industry is going and come up with relevant propositions to match. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? And I'm out of time. Thank you very much. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, find me on a smoking break or the bar, or feel free to email me at matt_rosa@BAT. Unless you're a competitor, in which case don't email me, find me at a smoking break or a bar. Thanks.
Matt, I received a question if your slides will be available, at least from 3 people. 2 of them SMS'd me.
Pardon?
If your slides will be available to be emailed.
Yes, but you'll have to wait because I'm not allowed to send PowerPoint, so I'll convert it to a PDF and I will send it to anyone that would like it. Okay?
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.